This meeting is being recorded. Okay, so we're ready to go. And that's all for me. Over to Hannah. Thank you so much for being here. And we're looking forward to your paper called Pleasure, Parlors, Phosphates, and the Pastoral, Ice Cream Consumption Sites and Spa Culture in 19th Century America.
Thank you. I'm just gonna take a second to share my screen. All right, so hello everyone. I'm so happy that so many of you are joining and from so many different places. And again, it's great to hear that everybody is into ice cream or craving some. So I hope that this talk transports you a little bit and you can go enjoy some ice cream afterwards. So I'm going to be discussing how three main sites of upper and middle class ice cream consumption promoted ideas of escapism, health, pastoralism, and leisure, ideas of which I argue came directly from European, specifically British spa culture. Despite ice cream becoming a universal commodity during the 19th century, pleasure gardens, ice cream parlors, and soda fountains were exclusive locations that continued to uphold, construct, and to play into the spa-like fantasy. And these ideas conveyed to working class and Black people that they could not enjoy the same resort-like privileges. So for my research, using historical methodology, I studied newspapers, journals, trade cards, advertisements, illustrations, and social commentaries. I engage with the work of historians such as Cindy Lauble, whose book Urban Appetites initially inspired me to even begin this research. She uses food as a lens to argue how New York City became a metropolis in the 19th century. And in her book, she discusses the interesting role of ice cream parlors in the expanding food city. I also read the works of culinary historians, performance historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, and geographers to help build my argument. So why ice cream? If you know anything about me, you know that my life and passion is ice cream. I make my own ice cream. And I wanted to use my interest in ice cream to explore what it means in history. So specifically, or of course, ice cream plays a very important part in this research as a commodity, but I'm specifically looking at ice cream landscapes of consumption. I argue that by using these ice cream landscapes as a lens to look at the social and cultural norms that shaped this period of American history, we can better understand how spaces were able to include some, exclude others based on their gender, socioeconomic position, race, despite selling and promoting a commodity that was readily accessible. So to start, I just want to give you a brief history of ice cream and spas, so everything kind of makes a little bit more sense. Ice cream, as we are familiar with it in America today, originated in Europe in the 16th century, but the roots of ice cream go back further to 12th century Persia with a frozen fruit concoction called sharbat. From the 16th to 17th century, ice cream was served just primarily to the aristocracy. The first mention of ice cream in America happened in the 18th century when it was served at a dinner party at the Maryland governor's house. It was strawberry ice cream, and William Black wrote in his diary it was some fine ice cream, highlighting its still very special nature. So of course, I'm going to be talking about spa culture throughout this talk, which may seem a bit strange, as I'm sure the last time you went to a spa, you weren't served ice cream along with your massage, but I argue that spas have a lot more to do with ice cream than you might think. Since the classical period, people have been going to spaces to consume and bathe in mineral waters, which have been believed to be medicinal and therapeutic and have those properties. The natural mineral water sites still existed throughout the Middle Ages, but really gained popularity again in the 17th century, especially in places like Vichy, France. The French took their spas very seriously, but as more spas opened up, specifically in England, like Bath, England, it became more about a pleasurable experience, so that it would include other entertainments besides just the water. The waters themselves, their medicinal properties were tied to the physical space. So you couldn't go ahead and pick up a bottle to go if you wanted to get that rest and to heal. You had to actually go to the spa, to the landscape. This idea was translated then into pleasure gardens, which started in England, and were very similar, except they focused less on waters and more on the other entertainments. They were seasonal gardens with manicured plants, shaded walkways, fireworks shows, musical concerts, and of course, ice cream. So the British brought over the resort experience to America, and for that reason, a lot of American pleasure gardens took on the name English pleasure gardens as shorthand, like Vauxhall, which was the famous London pleasure garden. To give you an idea of the atmosphere of a garden, an advertisement from the Odeon Ice Cream Garden to the New York City suggested that the Bow and Bells have once more a cool place of resort where they can talk soft things over saucers of vanilla and lemon, the refreshing tinkle of the silvery fountain. And listen to the refreshing tinkle of the silvery fountain. So advertisements stressed that these gardens were resorts for relaxation, getting away from the city life, which meant escaping environmental pollution and also escaping the working classes. This was done with greenery, refreshments, entertainments, and ice cream itself was an impressive amusement, as it was still very special at the beginning of the 19th century to be able to eat something frozen in the hot summer. The ice trade took off by the 1830s, which made ice much cheaper, but at the beginning of the century, it was still cut out of frozen winter lakes by hand. Sugar kind of followed a similar path or timeline of ice as when it became cheaper, but at the beginning of the 19th century, it was still quite expensive as well. Many pleasure gardens had a refreshment ticket or entrance fee. These weren't crazy prices, but pleasure garden owners advertised their establishments as spaces that were for gentlemen and ladies. As you can see in this image, the people that were wanted at pleasure gardens did dress and act a certain way. The terms genteel and ungenteel were boundary keeping and created and controlled by the upper classes. They're not as clear as the terms like upper class and working class are. In the 19th century, being genteel meant looking and acting a certain way and acting appropriately. So one of the ways that pleasure gardens owners worked towards this atmosphere was by ensuring that ladies felt welcomed and catered to. Pleasure gardens, like the other landscapes I'll discuss, were co-constructed by women whose presence signaled that the garden was a respectable place, in contrast to other city entertainment venues like sports and taverns. In the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen had very few public spaces to socialize together, and restaurants and bars at this time were male-centric spaces. So pleasure gardens not only allowed women to have a place to feel taken care of, a place to sit and relax, eat ice cream, but also to mingle with men. Of course, as the name suggests, pleasure gardens did allow for romantic encounters, but there is this tension between appropriate romances and illicit ones that might occur behind bushes and walkways. So while people of the working class could find their way into the gardens, which was one of the reasons that they slowly fell out of favor, Black people were not welcomed by any means, except as servers or as constructed ideas of Blackness in the form of minstrel performances. Minstrelsy was popular among pleasure gardens, and such acts not only reaffirmed white superiority, but also connected the manufactured rural landscape of the pleasure garden with a romantic and pastoral vision of the South. Gentility, as I'm sure you can guess, was white. There were four known pleasure gardens that were run by free Black people. throughout this time, but they didn't really last longer than a season due to complaints from white people who could not understand how Black people could fit into the idea of gentility, their idea of it. So this quote from George G. Foster, who's a social commentary, wrote a social commentary, kind of points out a few interesting things. First, he notes that the Black server laughs at the spoons he hands to the customers for their ice cream, implying that he doesn't get what they're used for, even though, of course, contemporary Black-run pleasure gardens would prove otherwise, would prove that Black people did enjoy ice cream. He also notes, towards the end of the quote, the more tension that existed between the lower classes and the upper classes, which led to the pleasure gardens closing. So I need to bring the city streets into my discussion as a kind of fourth landscape, because it is important to understand that ice cream existed outside of these three main consumption sites I'm talking about. Street peddlers sold ice cream throughout the whole 19th century, and they became more popular during the middle of the century due to the cheaper ice and sugar prices. Just to give you an idea, the price of sugar fell up 30% between 1840 and 1850. So contemporary accounts and newspapers discuss the noise of peddlers and the judgment that many upper class people had towards the idea that a poor person would spend the little money they had on ice cream. So it's interesting that the upper and middle classes did not think that lower classes should indulge in something pleasurable like ice cream. Most peddlers were lower class immigrants, specifically Italian immigrants and Black people. The ice cream they sold was often referred to as hokey pokey, which comes from the Italian phrase ecco un poco, meaning here's a little. Hokey pokey was typically served in dishes. They would be eaten, the ice cream would be eaten by the customers with their hands, and then the dish would be returned to be quickly washed and given to another customer. In one contemporary social commentary, an observer discusses the difference between ice cream peddlers, noting that the countryman's product, you see the image of him here, is good enough for the pickiest of palates because it is made with fresh milk. Throughout the 19th century, there was a real fear of contaminated milk that would make and did make people sick. It definitely wasn't a problem that was just among peddlers and outside vendors. There are a lot of newspaper articles that reported ice cream poisoning that took place in parlors, but there was a focus on fresh country milk being healthier and safer overall, rather than swill milk, which was produced in the cities. And the idea of country milk echoes the idea of pastoralism. So I love this illustration that was in Harper's Bazaar in summer, and it compares what a hot summer day looks like in a very fashionable ice cream parlor on Broadway in New York City versus what the city streets in the Bowery looks like. You can notice many differences in the dress and the people and the atmosphere. So ice cream was cheap on the streets because that was the only thing you were paying for, just the ice cream. At the ice cream parlor, one paid for the experience and the luxury of the elaborate interior. And while the ice cream was not outside, you weren't eating it outside like you were at pleasure gardens, it's still the design of the space and the advertisements of ice cream parlors still promoted these ideas of escapism and pastoralism. These spaces were often decorated with marble tiles, oak carvings, frescoed ceilings, chandeliers, mirrors, and plants. So again, the parlor was co-constructed by women or female patrons. While pleasure gardens sought the patronage of gentlemen and ladies, the ice cream parlor became a white, wealthy, female-centric space. Ice cream parlors were often synonymous with lady eateries, and ladies could visit these parlors without male chaperones and without worrying about their reputation. So originally it was thought that women only wanted sweet bites, small bites. They had a delicate appetite. But as these spaces became more popular with women, a lot of parlors grew to offer extensive menus, giving women all that they could need after an afternoon of shopping. Well, you had these parlors that promoted respectable women and then in turn felt respectable. There was always this fear of illicit romantic encounters or that the women patrons would bring questionable male guests. So one commentator wrote that at a fashionable parlor sat a middle-aged man and woman. They were evidently man and wife, though not each other's. Parlors, like pleasure gardens, of course, were not welcoming to the lower classes and even more so not welcoming to Black people. Well-off Black people were often mocked during this time for attempting to engage in white leisure activities. Here are two caricatures from Currier and Ives called Dark Town. That's what the series was called. And the series depicts Black people being mocked from doing everything from horse racing to ice cream consumption, as we see here. So you can see exaggerated stereotypical features throughout the images. The idea is that this Black woman in very fashionable dress is excited by the large tower of ice cream that's coming in and exclaims in a stereotyped and derogatory voice that she can't get enough. But then in the second image, we see that it's suggested that she couldn't handle the ice cream, the pleasure of it, a way that a gentle white person could. Her fan is hung up in defeat, and she needs to defrost, supposedly from some intense brain freeze. Again, white people did not see Black people fitting in to the world, regardless of class, and they actively sought to prevent this from happening. And they created these spaces, the design and advertisement, to signify that certain people weren't welcomed. This attitude carries on to the next location of ice cream consumption, the soda fountain. So the soda fountain, like the other two spaces, was an amusing retreat for the middle class, but it was also really directly drew inspiration from European spas with the focus of the consumption of mineral water. Soda fountains themselves, the actual contraption, first were seen at pharmacies since soda water, like spa water, was believed to be medicinal and therapeutic. You see in the image below a bit of a soda fountain that has a label on it that says Vichy, a nod to Vichy, France, that had the famous spa. And pharmacies began attracting female customers into their spaces, bringing them away from the parlors by adding sweeter syrups to the soda. And by the 1870s, the ice cream soda was a very popular drink, and newspapers noted its popularity specifically with women. I really love the visual image this quote gives, so I'll read it quickly. There is a succulent sound of a syrupy pout, a gentle fizz, and a gurgling gush, a delicate splash as a lump of ice cream finds its way from a big metal scoop into the depths of a crystal glass. Another agitato, a passionate furioso, top of fizz, and the fair guzzler of Gotham is served with her ice cream soda. So early designs of soda fountains resembled the gilded, elaborate aesthetic of the ice cream parlor. We see on a couple of these trade cars, the nod to pastoralism. And a lot of trade cards hinted that coming to the soda fountain would give you a resort experience. There was a Baltimore fountain that claimed that you could be transported all the way to Cape May, a really well-known beach resort, for just 5 cents by sipping on an ice cream soda. Towards the end of the century, though, the design of fountains shifted a bit to a more modern, sleeker look, one that suggested cleanliness and coolness, meaning that the proprietors of soda fountains believed that women at this time, their main patrons, had different priorities. Having a space that appeared sparkling and cool diminished the fears of ice cream poisoning, which was continuing throughout towards the end of the century. This trade card here depicts some polar bears as customers enjoying cold ice cream sodas. In contrast to the clean and well-dressed bears is a bird-like devilish creature we see tending to the fountain's furnaces in the back. So while a fountain may appear cool to their customers, the back of house was hot with the boilers and engines for making ice cream, also hidden from the fountain's customers or those who were doing the labor over the ice cream. So in the case of Arctic soda advertisement, the laboring creature and the back is presumably a Black or European immigrant employee. So despite their different locations, design, and structure, pleasure gardens, ice cream parlors, and soda fountains all took inspiration from European spa culture by promoting these ideas of escapism, pastoralism, health, and leisure to upper and middle class consumers. Ladies co-constructed these spaces. When upper middle class women visited them, they were seen as respectable, and in turn, these women were seen as respectable for patronizing such spaces. Compared to the city streets where ice cream was enjoyed by everyone, the ice cream parlor and soda fountain provided its customers with a resort experience, which was created through the design. It was elaborate, the advertisements, and the other amusements, such as the machine of the soda fountain and the customers themselves who filled the space. There was tension in these landscapes between the city and the country. There's the idea that you could still be in the city, but participate in an elite romantic pastoral spa experience. And in these landscapes, are they conveyed to working class and Black people that they didn't require a break from city life or work. They didn't need a place to relax, rest, or refuel. As exclusive locations, pleasure gardens, parlors, and fountains ignored that working class and Black people enjoyed the same pleasures, specifically ice cream. While it was okay for Black people and lower class people to provide entertainment or labor for these spaces, they weren't spaces for them to relax themselves. And this idea definitely continued on into the 20th century. In my paper, I talk briefly about Angela Jill Cooley's argument about white Southern fear of bodily contamination. One of the reasons that the civil rights sit-ins were so impactful was that it was believed by white Southerners inappropriate for Black people to dine next to white customers at lunch counters or soda fountains. Even though Black people's money was accepted, at the time, Black people could still not have the privilege of stopping in to rest and refuel at the soda fountain, like how white female shoppers did at the ice cream parlor. And so ultimately, I argue that by studying landscapes of consumption, this is critical to not only understand food culture, but how culture and social norms were enacted, constructed, and enforced. And of course, I do want to talk a little bit about the ice cream that I made, inspired by all my research. It's only natural for me to have done this. I made 3 flavors that have the consistent theme of lemon throughout them, but they're all embellished in different ways. We have the Pleasure Garden, which was cognac over lemon ice served with currants. The Ice Cream Parlor, violet vinegar and lemon ice cream with candied violets. And the Soda Fountain was almond lemon ice cream with lemon soda and bitters. In Pleasure Garden, the brandy represents the gentleman who dined beside the lady, while the teeny currant pearls symbolize the genteel nature of the gardens. In the Ice Cream Parlor, the vinegar illuminates the hostility of the parlors to non-upper middle class white patrons, specifically women. And then the candied violets signifies the decorative environment of the parlors, as well as the luxury of sugar, flowers, and fruits, which remained out of the reach of the lower classes, even as ice cream became accessible. And then lastly, in Soda Fountain, the almond, with its symbolism rooted in virginity, love, and honor, hints at the fear of illicit relationships. The lemon soda explains the medicinal history and the new technology of the fountain, and the bitters represents the still extensive animosity towards lower class and Black Americans in the fountains. Each of these flavors themselves were popular as well in the 19th century in these spaces. So thank you all so much for listening. I'm looking forward to discussing with you and hearing any questions that you might have.